We are good at kayaking. We are not good at a lot of other things. Okay, anyways, so Haley and I and Libby Toby, who is boarding a flight right now, so she couldn't be here. She really tried to find a quiet corner in the airport, but she couldn't find one. We are the Grand Salmon team. I'll introduce myself really quick and then I'll pass it off to Haley. My name is Brooke Hess. I am from Missoula, Montana. Actually, right now I'm living in Truckee, California, where we have air quality of 500 AQI, which is horrendous. But I grew up in Missoula, Montana. I've been kayaking pretty much my whole life. I spent the last 10 years as a professional whitewater kayaker on the US freestyle kayaking team, just traveling the world and competing for Team USA. And I have an undergraduate degree in geoscience, and I have a graduate degree in journalism, specifically science writing. So a big focus that I've had on this project has been science communication and communicating the science of the declining salmon populations to the public in an understandable, relatable, and fun way. One of our taglines that we made up for ourselves is we've been trying to make conservation sexy. So that's what I've been doing. Haley, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Sure. My name's Haley Thompson. I met Brooke a little over a decade ago on the Payette River in Idaho, where she very kindly allowed a fellow dirtbag to stay in her van with her because I didn't have other living arrangements. But I grew up whitewater paddling, was very fortunate to grow up in a kayaking family, and then started competing in slalom. I raced in C1s, which are single person racing canoes, and K1s, which are single person kayaks, for Team USA for most of my teenage years. And then I left competitive slalom paddling and I joined the US Coast Guard. I attended the Coast Guard Academy and I got my bachelor's of science in fisheries biology with an emphasis on salmonid species. And I actually also studied orca behavioral psychology, and that tied in pretty neatly to this project, which I never really foresaw. I spent about a decade on active duty before I left, and I now do graphic design and art full time, but I'm really selective with the projects that I take on, and I want most of them to be engaged in conservation and presenting information to communities in a way that's engaging enough to generate action. And I was lucky enough to be kayaking with Brooke in Chile last spring, and she invited me to join this expeditionary team, and it seemed pretty perfect. So here we are, months later. Brooke, do you want to introduce Libby for her?
Yeah, Libby is our third member of the expedition team. She grew up in Salt Lake. She lives in Missoula now. She has an undergraduate degree in chemistry and environmental science, and she has a master's degree in international conservation and development with a focus on climate change policy. So she has been our policy lady. She has been following what's been happening in Congress, what's been happening in the White House, what's been happening in Washington State with these dams that we're going to be talking about. So she's been a huge asset, and she's also been a river guide for the past 10 years. And she came straight off of our 1,000-mile expedition and went straight back up to the Middle Fork of the Salmon, where we had put in 3 months prior, and she just guided 6 Middle Fork trips. So she's pretty awesome. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the journey. So we started April 29th at the headwaters of the Middle Fork of the Salmon, which is the middle river over on the right side of that map. And we skied the headwaters of the Middle Fork, and then we paddled the Middle Fork, and then we shuttled back up, skied the headwaters of the main salmon, paddled the main salmon all the way from Redfish Lake down to the confluence with the actually down to Vinegar, where we took out. And then we were going to paddle the South Fork of the Salmon as well, but the water levels were really high that weekend, and it was not a good decision, and we made the right decision to forego that stretch, but we did still get to visit the South Fork of the Salmon and the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon, and we spent a lot of time at the Stibnite Gold Mine, which is, I'll talk about this a little later in the presentation, but it's a site where there is a proposed reopening of the mine, and we're very opposed to it. So we paddled all of that way, and then we paddled the Snake River all the way through the 4 lower Snake River dams. We portaged each one of the 4 lower Snake River dams. And then we paddled the Columbia River all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and we reached the ocean on July 15th. And the whole way throughout this whole expedition, it took us 78 days. We stopped in communities along the route, and we did presentations, we did school visits, we talked to river guides, we talked to fishermen, we talked to biologists, we talked to 5th graders who were raising salmon smolts. We met with the Nimipu people, and we just talked about this issue of the salmon declines, and we learned from these people, and we helped, like, we spoke with people who didn't know about it and tried to educate people on it, and just connected with these communities. And one of the biggest takeaways that I came away with from this expedition was like how connected everything is. The headwaters of the main salmon is 1,000 miles away from the Pacific Ocean, like the mouth of the Columbia, but it's the same water. You know, we never left this water source the whole time. We traveled the same one. So anything that happens at the headwaters affects everything that happens downstream, and anything that happens downstream impacts everything that happens upstream. And it was just really eye-opening to actually see that in person on this expedition. So here's just some photos. On the upper left side of the screen, we have Haley in front of Slide Rapid on the lower salmon. So the lower salmon, it's not normally run above 20,000 cubic feet per second. We put on at 60,000 cubic feet per second. So it was very high. And the reason people don't run it that high is because of this one rapid pictured here, Slide. It gets very dangerous. And it's actually just as dangerous to portage it as it is to run it. So we had a very big day, but it was also an awesome day. We worked really well as a team, and it was wonderful. The photo below that is Haley and Libby in front of our tents at the confluence of the Salmon River with the Snake River. That was one of the more beautiful campsites we've had. And it was just really special. Like, we had paddled the whole Salmon River, and then we were confluencing with the Snake. And so it was just like a different part of the journey. In the middle is us on the beach after landing in the Pacific Ocean. And we were super psyched to have made it there. On the right was at the top was our first day skiing the headwaters of Marsh Creek, which is what feeds into the Middle Fork of the Salmon. And then at the bottom is all 3 of us, the whole team together. Okay, so why do Idaho's salmon and steelhead matter? So salmon are an anadromous fish species. So what this means is they spend part of their lives in freshwater and part of their lives in saltwater. So the salmon of Idaho are born in these cold mountain springs in Idaho, like at the headwaters of the Middle Fork, at the headwaters of the Main, at the headwaters of the South Fork. And then when they are smolts, so when they're juvenile salmon, about 3 to 4 inches long, they travel all the way through the Salmon River, through the Snake River, through the Columbia, and then reach the Pacific Ocean, where they spend the majority of their lives, about 3 to 5 years. Then when they're ready to reproduce or spawn, they travel all the way back up that whole migration path, all the way back to the headwaters, to their spawning grounds where they reproduce. So, there's the map. You can see their whole journey. So when we're talking, so why they matter, I guess, when they come back up to reproduce, usually after they spawn, they die, or bears and other predators will line the banks as these salmon runs are happening and take these salmon into the forest to eat them and then dispose of their carcasses everywhere. So scientists have cored the trees around these rivers, and they have actually found salmon DNA in the cores of these ancient trees that surround these rivers. So the salmon are essentially a transport mechanism they bring nutrients all the way from the ocean, all the way up to these headwaters. And so that nitrogen, like the ocean nitrogen, is found in these trees at the headwaters of these rivers. So it's really important to have salmon in this ecosystem because they're so impactful to the whole habitat. So when I'm talking about salmon returns and we're talking about salmon declines, salmon returns is them coming back to spawn, how many salmon make it back to their headwaters to reproduce. So the problem we have is last year in 2021, if you look at the red chart here, there were 4 wild adult sockeye salmon that made it back to Stanley Basin to spawn. 4. There should be about 9,000. It's kind of similar numbers with spring, summer Chinook. Last year there were around 7,000. There should be 127,000. So just pretty shocking numbers. And yeah, I don't know, 4 is significantly below sustainability. So the problem, a lot of scientists have looked into these declines. The problem that they have concluded is the 4 lower Snake River dams. We have too many dams in the way. They think about 60% of the mortality of these fish is caused by these 4 lower Snake River dams. What we saw when we traveled through the 4 lower Snake River reservoirs that are caused by the dams, it was like we had spent the previous month paddling through the main salmon, the middle fork salmon, the lower salmon, which all have cold, clear, clean water. Libby was drinking water straight out of the middle fork the whole time we were on the river, and she was fine. She also has a gut of steel. I wouldn't do that, but she was totally fine. We would see hundreds of bald eagles a day, hundreds of great blue herons. There were fish jumping everywhere. It was a very healthy habitat. And then as soon as we hit the Snake and the water slowed down and we got to the reservoir, the water was warm. The water smelled bad. There was a film on the surface of it, like a film of gunk. The only fish we saw were floating belly up. They were dead. I think we saw 1 eagle in the whole 4 days that we were on the Snake. And yeah, it was just like, it was desolate and it was bare, and it was very clear in experiencing that why there are these salmon declines, that it's just not a healthy enough habitat for salmon to survive in. So another problem is that we've been advocating for is we want to advocate for a moratorium on the Stibnite gold project. So the Stibnite gold mine is at the headwaters of the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon. So it's at the headwaters of this whole river drainage. And we got to visit the Stibnite gold mine site, and we got a tour by Perpetual Resources, which is the company trying to reopen this mine. And basically, they are trying to reopen and expand a tailings pile that is already huge. And you can right now, like right today, if you went there, you can see arsenic and cyanide leaching into the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River. And they're going to make that tailings pile about 5 times as big as it is now. So that's a huge problem. And yeah, we're really advocating for a moratorium on that. Okay, Haley, take it away.
All right, so why did we choose to do a 1,000-mile expedition when we did this 1,000-mile expedition? It's fair to say that there's a good amount of serendipity that came into this expedition happening, how it did and when it did. Brooke and Libby returned from New Zealand this spring that COVID hit, and ended up accidental roommates in Missoula, and had this conversation that occurred actually, I believe, during a high water lock saw lap, which they chose to take a topo duo down, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a tandem kayak, and it's like a clown car in whitewater kayaking. And they were having a pretty fabulous time, giggling their heads off. And they were like, you know what would be amazing is if more people utilized whitewater kayaking trips as advocacy tools, because there's so much conservation science that you have immediate access to when you're on these whitewater rivers. which, we're quite fortunate to be equipped with the skills to navigate them safely. And so they started talking about doing a South Fork salmon from the headwaters up at East Fork, South Fork in Yellow Pine, which is where that Stibnite gold mine is currently and has been and continues to contaminate the headwaters of the East Fork, South Fork. And they were like, well, we'll do the South Fork. We'll put together a short, maybe a YouTube edit about how we need to prevent this mine from being built. And that rapidly kind of exploded. And a couple of really incredible nonprofits, Idaho Rivers United and another one called Rivers for Change, got involved. And they said, be pretty sweet if you guys just did a source to sea. And from that point, we started adding in other branches of the Salmon River, thinking that we might as well explore the science of the river ecology in all of the forks, because those headwaters have been really, really well cared for as ecosystems, and a ton of preservation and restoration work has gone into making those pretty idyllic salmon ecosystems. So that was sort of like how the expedition came together. But then the timing of it really was quite magical, because this past summer, the summer of 2022, so Senator Murray and Governor Ainsley of Washington State decided to put together a public survey asking residents of Washington State and people outside of the state, but in the Pacific Northwest, what their opinions were on the 4 lower Snake River dams. If you have any background in this region, the 4 lower Snake River dams were built mostly in the 60s. And when those dams were closed, as Brooke said earlier, they created these 4 really large, really stagnant reservoirs, which with the advent of global warming has led to some pretty significant rising river temperatures. If you know much about salmon ecology and mortality, at temperatures above 68 degrees Fahrenheit in the water, salmonid mortality starts skyrocketing. And in recent years, as global temperatures have increased in this region, they've also seen mortality in salmon skyrocketing. And so when Murray and Inslee put together this survey for public comment and released it, it actually pretty much aligned perfectly with when we launched on this expedition. So we decided to sort of leverage the spectacle of having an all-women's whitewater kayaking expedition and ski touring and sea kayaking expedition. And like Brooke said, we tried to make it humorous. We tried to make it engaging. We tried to hook in communities that maybe normally wouldn't have been really involved in climate action work, and leverage that to our benefit. So everywhere we went during the initial stages of the trip, we were getting people to write survey comments in favor of breaching. We were educating the public. We were interviewing people so that we were better equipped to inform people about the issues. And then as that initial survey closed, Murray and Inslee released a draft report basically saying, based on public opinion and all of these facts that we have, breaching seems to be a good avenue. And they released that draft for public comment. So then we started pushing for that. And the entire time we were doing this, we were also having, raft guides and kayakers and people at the McCall Public Library writing hundreds of postcards to congressional representatives and to the White House and to the EPA. We kind of bit off a bit more than maybe we should have, but the timing really was perfect, because by the time we hit the ocean, the draft report comment period closed, and we were just like a drop in the wave of grassroots activism that took place surrounding this issue. But it was very, very satisfying to see those public comments just being expansively in favor of breaching and contributing to salmonid recovery. And then I guess just on like a, salmonid biology nerd point, we launched at the end of April on this expedition. The end of April is when a lot of salmon roe began hatching in these cold headwater streams. And the smolts that would have been born right around when we started this expedition, they hit the ocean, and that process, that migratory process, is called smoltification, when they go from a freshwater species to a saltwater species in their anadromous process. Those smolts hit the ocean within days of when we did. So we like to say that we aligned our smoltification with the salmon smoltification. So why now? There were a lot of different parts to it, but in the end, it felt really, really right for a lot of different reasons.
Cool. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask us questions.
Here's a question from Brian, one of the volunteers. So what's the path to dam removal? I've been just seeing in the news for a while, Inslee and company, recommended it. And did the Corps of Engineers put something out? I don't recall. But anyway,
The White House
is there a
did.
decision point out there?
So the White House also recommended it. They're federal dams, so it actually has to go through congressional vote. And I actually don't know where they're standing on that. Do you have any more updates than I do, Haley?
No, so let's see. Mid-July, the White House pushed out a presidential statement saying that the Biden administration was going to push for dam breaching in the 4 lower Snake River dams. So that's huge, just to have that branch of our federal government also on board, to have Marie and Inslee on board. And then also, I think one of the things that makes this environmental effort pretty unique, so we have a lot of Republican representatives from Idaho who are in support of dam breaching as well. And I think one of the things that we have, come to accept in a lot of our conservation work is that, okay, we're going to be able to get Democratic representatives on board, and then we're just never going to get Republican votes. But one of the things that we started to notice was, so we also did a decent amount of work with Trout Unlimited on this project. If you look at the composition of Trout Unlimited membership, it's amazing, because there's like no demographic that really emulates that. It's people from like really, really diverse walks of life. So I do believe this is supposed to be brought before Congress sometime this fall. I don't know exactly when. But one of the things that we took a lot of hope from was that, in our travels, we were in towns like Salmon, Idaho, which if you've been to Salmon, Idaho, that's pretty staunchly Republican zone. And people were really amped on breaching because they love fishing. So I think between having Murray and Inslee pushing hard for breaching and for having those dams physically located in Washington with that presidential statement, and then also just knowing that, I think there are a lot of politicians in Congress right now that want a gimme. And this is one of the few things that it seems like a lot of voters and the populace are on the same page about, especially if you portray it as like a recreational opportunity for trout and salmon fishing. So that wasn't a perfect answer to your question, but
I think that,
active Congress is going to be the next step.
Yeah, so it has to pass Congress, Senate, get signed into law.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So does that mean
And
want to like,
Sorry.
if folks want to like get involved and also advocate for this same thing, they should just talk to their representatives at this point.
Right, your representatives. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think one of the things that we found that was really interesting was that, you know, we had a lot of people towards the end of our journey who were following along on the expedition's social media. And we had people from like, you know, the Southeast US who were writing their representatives, who actually heard back from their representatives and yeah, with positive feedback. So I think that's kind of a interesting takeaway, is that this is sort of like a seemingly small climate action piece that people can get engaged with from anywhere.
Haley and Brooke, just thank you for doing this and presenting wonderful pictures. I imagine there's a lot of stories as well. So Idaho to Washington State. So I wonder, did you run into indigenous tribes, indigenous peoples along the way, and are they getting involved in this as well?
Oh yeah, the Nez Perce tribe, the Nimipu people, they have been leading the charge on this for decades. And we've actually been working with Nimipu, protecting the environment quite a bit. They've been sort of mentors for us. They know significantly more about this than we do, and they have been fighting this fight for way longer than we have been. But yeah, basically, they are trying to preserve their treaty rights, because their treaty rights with the United States guarantees them hunting and fishing rights on their land. And without salmon, they have no fishing. So that's been a big fight that they've been working on, and we've been trying to follow in their footsteps, follow their lead, because they know best what should happen on their land. They've been there longer than we have.
I think another thing to note is, like, it seems like across the United States right now, people are having the dawning realization, like, if we want to work in conservation, then indigenous land management practices are a pretty obvious place to start. People who have been living here for tens of thousands of years probably know how to care for this environment better than people who migrated from Europe. And I think one of the things that we found so impressive, you know, we also worked with the Chinook people. You know, we've had a lot of communication with a actually like pretty wide variety of indigenous groups, but I think our closest ties are with the Nimipu people, just based on where we were. And I think the Nimipu have set a really unique example, because they've done a blend. Like, they have these really, really well-established indigenous land management practices. And then they're also just sort of like not playing the games anymore. You know, one of the big political stop gaps that the dam operators have been pushing, and you'll see this, you know, in like the Seattle Times and stuff like that, is, well, how are you possibly going to replace the power that we provide? And those 4 lower Snake River dams, when they were constructed, were only providing 4% of the power to the Pacific Northwest, and that's diminished over time as they've lost efficiency. And so the Nimipu tribe basically was like, well, fine, we're going to go ahead and privately fund developing solar panels on Nimipu buildings, on our infrastructure throughout our tribal lands. And we'll show you how easy it is to replace that power. So to date, and it may have increased since the summer when I had my latest statistics, just within that tribe, with no, you know, US federal funding, the Nimipu people replaced 10% of the power that the dams were putting out. And they were like, look, we don't need this. And these dams are leading to the collapse of our traditional subsistence. So if you want to make good on 1855 treaty promises, which, you know, we can all laugh about that, you know, realistically, they're at this point where there will be no fish left for them to traditionally harvest, even if they did have access to their traditional fishing grounds, which, by the way, we kayaked over the surface of their traditional fishing grounds. They're underwater. So you can't fish in a place that you traditionally did if you need scuba equipment to access it and there are no fish there. So yeah, I think getting to work with the Nimiku was like one of the biggest game changers for us during this process. And as an aside, kind of a fun thing, we're looking to go back in future summers and put together basically like a Nimipu youth whitewater paddling camp, and just work on some like whitewater skills so that hopefully once these dams are removed, it can be a group of Nimipu kayakers who do the first dam-free source to sea. Anybody else?
As a science communicator myself, I'm super interested in hearing, and it sounds like maybe like this fishing angle is something that really resonated with people, but I'm curious, like in telling this story and connecting with communities, what was some of the most potent messages that you were able to send and things that you learned along the way?
That's a really good question. So a big part of our communications campaign was social media, because that's how a lot of people get their news these days, is through Instagram. So we we kind of did a funny communication strategy, and we wanted it to be silly. We wanted it to be fun. We are sponsored by Pit Viper, which is, I don't know if you guys know what Pit Viper is, but they're hilarious sunglasses that just make you look so silly. But like we would pose in our Pit Viper sunglasses with fake mustaches, like holding beers and just silly stuff. But then we would intersperse that with like one of the videos that was most impactful was when we hit the first dam on this lower Snake. I caught a clip of Libby breaking down in tears because we had just spent the previous month on the most beautiful river in the world. And then we hit this dam and it's just like this horrible place. And you can hear the dam from like 3 miles away. You can see it from 4 miles away. The water smells bad. The water's warm. It's a really gross place. And it was just this kind of slap in the face to all of us who we've grown up on these rivers. You know, I grew up in Missoula paddling the Clark Fork, paddling the Blackfoot, these really clean, wonderful natural rivers. And then to hit the Snake River and just be like, oh, we did this. Like, oh, like this is human caused and this is horrible. So we posted this video of Libby just bawling right in front of the dam, and it got some really emotional responses. And I think it got shared definitely over 100 times, but that was one of the more effective ones, was like interspersing really silly, hilarious bullshit with serious, emotionally triggering science-based posts. That was kind of our strategy. Yeah. Haley, did you have a favorite post we did?
Oh God, I don't know if I had a favorite post, but well, I have a lot of favorite posts. They're usually involving Brooke and like some form of discussing what we did with our poop. But no, I think a big part for us was, you know, for anybody who does advocacy work, and it's funny going from like having worked for the federal government to now being like an advocate. I'm like, oh, this is a big switch. Like I'm allowed to speak my mind now. Advocacy fatigue is real and people get exhausted doing it. They get very depressed. And, you know, we had a lot of conversations on the river while we were paddling with Libby, who's done a lot of work in international scale conservation work, which feels like a machine that you can't ever quite get to start moving. If you make it bite-sized, if you make it approachable, if you give people like simple steps, and then you intersperse the meat and potatoes with, like Brooke said, the sparkly, giggly, pet vipers and Juanita's chips, like those, like we really did try to make it goofy so that we kept people engaged, so that they were checking in on what we were doing because they thought it was funny and interesting. And they were like, oh God, what heinous portage are these girls doing today? But then when it was like, okay, we need people to submit comments, and we need them to be informed comments. We want to engage with people emotionally and where they're at, but we also need to make it, educated enough that people are reading these comments are actually going to take them into consideration. And so a huge part of the strategy, like behind just the social media posts, was then like working with Idaho Rivers United to curate really, really well-informed statements that we could provide to people. So we would do reels on Instagram where we like gave them the links, and we'd like talk them through, this is exactly how you submit your public comment on this draft environmental impact statement, or whatever, like we really tried to make it like very simple so that your average 19-year-old raft guide in Riggins, who probably normally wouldn't do this sort of thing, is like, oh yeah, I can do that, no problem. So it was a bit of that.
If they see Libby on a dock in the middle of the Columbia in 30 seconds, they're like, oh yeah, maybe I can do that from my computer.
Yeah, I can do that also. So I think that was a big part of it. And I think another piece is we all have science backgrounds, and we've all been raised with the very like Western traditional scientific process, which is stay objective, be objective. Don't allow your emotions to like get tangled up in this science. And I guess one of the beautiful things about working with a lot of Indigenous groups is like, that's actually not the best way to go about protecting the environment that you live in. If you allow the environment that you are operating within to become my really, really good friend up in Alaska is Indigenous Supiaq and Dena'ina, and they have been like, we talk about every element of our environment as one of our relations. And so if we think about the river, if we think about the salmon, if we think about the canyon itself as relations, and we allow it to be emotional and powerful in a personal way, then you get people to like get off the couch and give a fuck. Sorry, give a damn. Yeah, but like I really do think that was, as much as we were trying to provide a lot of scientific information, like Brooke said, when we were honest and open about how emotional the experience was for us, people who grew up on the banks of the Salmon River or on the banks of the Snake River were like, yeah, me too. I want to protect this place too. And so I think that all comes together. Like, it's not just one method or another. It's like a special blend of being a human and loving a river. And then, yeah, hanging out with Brooke Hess and knowing how to drop a really good poop joke every now and then.
Yeah, and we are producing a film on the expedition and the campaign right now. So keep an eye out for that. I'm sure we will send it to adventure scientists to hopefully share with everyone. So that's another science communication thing we're working on right now, is the film.
Just want to jump in and say hi. My name's not Bill Unger. I'm just using his computer. I'm Greg Trinish. I'm the founder and executive director of the organization. So just wanted to say, Haley, Brooke, you guys are rad. Thank you so much for doing this and for collecting data for us. And everybody is here tonight. Great to see you. And just really appreciate all of you. Sorry I couldn't be here the whole night tonight. Just got done with my little one's open house at kindergarten. But really happy to make it for a little bit of this. And yeah, just admire what you guys achieved so much. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Right. Brooke, Haley, and the whole team, thank you so much. It's been incredible to follow along with your journey. It's I love that you're kind of like wrapping this up, talking about the emotions that are critical to communicating about conservation, because I also have a science background and kind of was schooled to stay away from overly emotional appeals. But I think finding that powerful story that's a real emotion to connect to is so critical, and your journey and your storytelling is exactly that. So it's been such a privilege to see this and to hear from you here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
Totally, yeah. We want to run through a little bit of a summer highlight reel for our entire Wild and Scenic River volunteer team, and just kind of highlight those accomplishments that absolutely went in tandem with just adventurers getting out and being a part of conservation. You know, it's something that's so important to be on the ground and have those stories of interacting with the environment that you're trying to conserve and preserve, and really appreciate it that way. So we have a little slideshow with a few stats that are fun to share. We'll go through a little bit of a tech switch over here. Yeah, it's been an incredible summer to see all of the photos that have come through, and the silliness that have come out of a lot of Lindsay's Alaska adventure. Loved watching those. Again, the Grand Salmon team, like just following along with your Instagram stories and your journey has really inspired us to continue on with our conservation work, and just that interaction with how much fun it is to get out. Thank you for everything that you guys have done. I know everyone here has already returned their gear. All-star volunteers donating your time as well tonight to be with us here. You will be expecting a volunteer survey coming next week. Of course, we're always trying to institute positive change, so please provide feedback, what went well, what we could do better. Helps us make it a better winter season for everyone who's continuing on. Gosh, we have shot it out of the water this summer with 281 surveys and 34 grab samples. I think Lindsay and Sean collected about 11 of those grab samples. It must have been, it was a wild shipment to you guys. Bravo. Here's a little map of all of the states that surveys and grab samples were collected on this summer. The ones in blue are the ones that we collected over a third of the total samples for the whole project. So in Oregon, we collected 96 surveys this summer out of a 250 total. So like Oregon, so many volunteers were out on the rivers hunting for data. Alaska also shot it out of the park with 41 samples, which getting up to Alaska rivers can be remote, it can be bushwhacking, it can be long river trips. So very much appreciate our Alaska team up there. Bravo.
And I'm just going to share some of the amazing photos that we've received from you volunteers. Some people will recognize their own work as we go through this, but right here we have just a beautiful photo from Dusty Reed, who went to the North Koyukuk River in Alaska. And Lindsay, you are one of our main photo sharers, so you're going to show up in this slideshow quite a bit. Here you are on the Green River and the Virgin River in the sort of spring, summer. We had lots of, as we heard from the Salmon Source to Sea team, high flows this summer. So we have a lot of photos from volunteers who were able to get out and collect. We have here Taylor Aldridge on the right, in Oregon, right before or after she skipped a rock across the river as per our summer challenge. And John Hart is on the right, sampling the Cascade Creek tributary of the white salmon. We also have Jerome Graber here, who was looking at my notes on the Verde River in Arizona. And Sean Anderson and his canine companion also on the green. They actually ran into Lindsay and Sean Tropsa when he was out. We had I would say that this summer was definitely a very epic adventure. We had of course, the Grand Salmon team, and we had Carl and Dewey pictured here, went on a I think it was about 8 days backpacking trip in Yosemite, and shared a bunch of photos from their adventures there. They sampled along the Merced River. Here you are, Lindsay and Sean. If you want to unmute and tell us just like quickly what you did when you were in the Alaskan wilderness this summer.
I think the photo on the left was our second sample site, and we were fortunate enough to not have to get out of our boats.
That was, the river went from floatable to very not floatable, and then back to floatable again.
You can tell by the smile on my face.
But beautiful crystal, like blue, clear water. And then the photo on the right is actually shortly after we saw what we didn't know at the time, but turned out to be a thing that I guess indigenous people up there would cut up a moose at the end of the season. And since we're in the Brooks Range, the outside is your refrigerator, because it's, you know, pretty cold most of the year. And so they would just take the moose and bury it in this like stone circle pit and leave it for the rest of the year until they wanted to come back and get it. But that was us going up and over from the John River drainage to the Tenaygook and then Koyukuk River drainages, on a kind of a 14-day, 180 something mile traverse of the Brooks Range north to south. So it's pretty cool.
Amazing. Thank you. Here's another photo from Dusty Reed from the actual river portion of his trip up there on the Koyukuk. And we also have this photo from Scott Barnard, who was in Mount Hood National Forest. This is on the South Fork of the Roaring River. And we even had a volunteer camp out this summer in Oregon. So
Yeah.
Isabella, if you want to share what happened there.
Well, we got to go traverse the Whiteous Creek drainage. It was quite a few different tributaries that were all flowing down eventually into the Deschutes to collaborate there. It was wild. We were hiking in 106-degree weather. And so definitely experiencing everything that Mother Nature can throw at you, and feeling the vitality of laying in a cool river in between miles was life-saving, if not life-changing.
So on the right, we have our project assistant, Hannah, who's staying cool while sampling.
Hey, question from Brian. I'm curious. I'm from Bend. I know the Whiteous. How many other samplers, volunteers do you have in the Bend area, Central Oregon?
I can think of at least 5 off the top of my head.
Okay.
Awesome people. I know that a couple of them are headed down to run the Rogue in the coming weeks as well. So there's quite a big community over there. Happy to connect you if you're ever interested in going out sampling.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you. Yeah. And part of the Rogue's on fire, I assume they.
Yes.
Yes.
Last I checked, it was at about 56% containment. So we're definitely watching that for them and helping well wishes.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for the outstanding efforts this year and this summer. And thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to wrap up now unless somebody wants to hang out and chat. But otherwise, thank you so much. And thanks for being part of our adventure scientist community.